today we're talking about the Balance is Better principles. One of those principles is about bold and courageous leadership, specifically bold and courageous leadership at national, regional, and local levels is required to design and deliver quality youth sport participation and development opportunities. In this principle, there's obviously a bit to unpack. To start, can you give me your first take on what this principle means?
Yeah, sure, Hamish. And, these conversations are really involved, so it's good to start to tackle some of these. But what this principle means to me, it's actually just taking a stand for what's right. So it's stepping across the commitment line to do what's right for our young people, our rangatahi. So, the evidence is really clear. It's been shouting at us for some time. So it's actually going, well, actually listen to that evidence and start to take some pretty significant steps and leading change. And as you alluded to, that happens at multiple levels. So part of having this principle of bold and courageous change is actually knowing that it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be smooth sailing, and being prepared for the pushback when it comes, because these bold and courageous decisions aren't going to be met with bouquets of flowers and people going, this is great. It's change and it's going to be hard. So in terms of making that commitment and being bold, that's what's really needed. It's too easy to keep doing the same thing. And often that starts with decision makers or leaders at governance levels, whether that's national, regional, or local. We talk a lot about top-down leadership and those bold and courageous messages being understood and being communicated from leaders. And we're seeing significant progress. There's lots of case studies on the Balance is Better website when it comes to what New Zealand Rugby have done in terms of being quite direct around under 16 as the first step in terms of representative rugby, where it's important for them. You've seen similar steps taken from hockey and netball. So really starting to challenge traditional competition structures, because we know better today than what we knew 20 years ago. So we can't keep doing the same things. So that's really what we mean by being bold and courageous. It's actually knowing that it's right and doing more than just listening to it, actually acting on it and being ready to deal with the pushback.
Thanks, Alex. So to me, what resonates is that there's a taking action piece within this principle. One of the things we often talk about is the importance of context, and obviously those contexts change in different settings. So when it comes to bold and courageous leadership, what this could look like could obviously change at a national, a regional, and a local setting, because the people who lead in those spaces have access to different levers. I'd be interested to understand if you could provide any examples for leaders in local settings around what bold and courageous leadership could look like.
Yeah, so I think the tricky thing for me answering this is I don't know the context for the different local or regional levels around the country. And we have a saying in our team that context is king. Like, the people closer to the ground know their people, know the connections, know the sort of currency to help influence things. So you have to come from a place of understanding first. You've got to do your homework. Actually, there's a piece of understanding why. So first, why is this change needed? If you're going to be bold and courageous, you need to understand why it's important. So you have to have done your homework. That's about understanding the evidence, understanding what young people want, having some of the research behind you. And then it's about how you speak up, where you speak up, your approach to influencing people and how you do those things. And that's quite a nuanced sort of skill where sometimes if you take the wrong approach, it can be inflammatory and actually make a situation worse. So, at a national level, they can provide that direction. They can say that these things are important. They can mandate change or say, hey, these competition structures are changing that are in our control. They can change some of their events. They can communicate the importance of this change to their membership. But quite often those changes hit the ground in regional and local levels. So what this looks like in a regional context will be very different. Some of the things we're seeing already in terms of season lengths changing, delaying the start of season, reducing the season length. It could be offering new events to meet the needs of different markets. It could be opening entry to different sort of groups of participants. It could be changing some of these representative programs to be more developmental in nature. It could be working with others, TAs and other sports to come to new sort of opportunities. So what this looks like locally or regionally or within a school or a club setting is going to be different. And I think, again, if we're talking about being bold and courageous, it's actually taking time out to work with other sports, again, committing to these changes. We talk about words versus actions. Well, we can keep talking about this, but action speaks so much louder than words. And again, just like in the first sort of discussion, it's not going to be met with it's going to be met with resistance. People aren't going to like it, so you've got to stay the course. That's what part of this being bold and courageous is, to get these changes over the line that are going to benefit our young people.
Thanks, Alex. That's probably a great segue into my last question around staying the course. So when we talk about bold and courageous leadership, there's a change element. There's a piece around driving, supporting, facilitating, overseeing, sustaining change. And one thing we know is obviously change can be met, particularly in a lot of these communities, with resistance. Can you talk to any advice or perhaps point to any resources for people who are geared up and ready to take action around some of the things they might want to consider on that journey?
Yeah, sure. Some of the learnings we've had over the last few years, both from a Sport New Zealand perspective and working close to the ground and some pilots, but also supporting sports and some of the learnings they've had. This is the crux. We can have all the evidence and the information we want that speaks to the need for change, but unless we can equip the people in leadership positions and close to the ground with the tools around how to successfully implement change, it doesn't matter. So this is really important, one of the most critical pieces. The best intent in the world can fall over if it hasn't got the right plan and support around it. And it's bloody hard because it's change. So change management has been a significant educational area for us over the last 3 years on the Sport Development Leader Residential, that we have been working with national and regional leaders that oversee pathways and different competition structures within the sports or at regional levels. There's many different tools you can use in terms of change, and you'll be able to find many of them just by Googling. And again, it's called change management for a reason, because if you don't think through and plan these changes, it turns into crisis management. And then you're on the back foot rather than being ahead of the process. But a model that we have been working with and starting to understand and has been helping sort of us in some of the sports is Cotter's change management tool that has 8 steps that all require thought and consideration in terms of change. You could group them into sort of 3 phases. One's creating the climate for change. So how are you creating a sense of urgency? Why is change needed? Who are the key relationships that you need on board to create that climate for change? You then move into sort of engaging and enabling change, which is more about actually communicating the vision, getting runs on the board. People talk about picking low-hanging fruit. So how do you get some momentum? And then you move into the next phase, which is about sort of implementing and sustaining change. Quite often, change starts and then it falls back because it's not sort of properly sort of implemented, or sustainability is not thought about. Now, there's so much in there we could unpack, but just in terms of probably a few points that are important to reinforce. One is internal alignment. So that could be, CE board and staff. That could be national, regional clubs. The importance of key leaders understanding why the change is so important. If you don't do your homework there again and they don't understand why you're changing, then they're probably not going to support you if you get pushback. The other piece is having a plan, which I alluded to. So, Cotters is a framework. There's actually thought that needs to go into each of those steps. You can anticipate a lot of the pushback if you actually think through it. So part of the challenge for sport in New Zealand is it's under-resourced. We don't have enough people. They're so busy, it's hard to find space and time to think through a change management plan, but that's something that's so important. It should be part of our jobs, not, over and above. Communication's critical, so consistent communication through change processes. Equipping the people, you've got to put key messages into the hands of the right people at the coal face. They're often the people that get the questions and the pushback, so help them out. What is a good colleague and a friend used to say, you can't take a knife to a gunfight. So you've got to give them the information they need to help deal with those curly questions. And, we touched on this, maintaining focus. Again, we've talked to sort of compass, not the clock. So while you're making the change and keeping that front and center, sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you'd like because of the buy-in process. And celebrating progress. When you're driving change like this, that it's attitudinal change, it's culture change, it's foreign to people. You're in the trenches getting things lobbed at you a lot. You have to get quite sort of resistant. So celebrate those wins when you get them. It's really important, those milestones. And when you look back sometimes over a couple of years, it's amazing the progress you make, but it doesn't feel like you're making progress when you're driving some of this change that it takes a while for people to understand.
There's a lot there. Fantastic advice, Alex. We'll make sure we put some links to those resources and other relevant resources in the notes below. I guess to sum up, bold and courageous leadership as a principle for balance is better. So to me, there's a knowing what action to take, but then there's taking that action. We've talked now to the why and provided a framework around how people can look at doing that. Have you got any last words of wisdom or advice for people out there?
Oh, I just think it's quite liberating when you believe in something and when you've got the evidence. So it's just about speaking up and having the courage to have those conversations. And when you have them, just having a few sort of tricks in your pocket, hip pocket poetry, we call it, you know, a little bit of evidence, some examples, a case study, just being ready and speaking up at the right time in the right way. So, you know, with best intent, sometimes speaking up at a certain time might not help the end cause. So just thinking about the right way to approach things will help this. And look, I face it every day in my role, you know, in sport, working for Sport New Zealand, but more so as a parent and a volunteer coach with my own kids. There's sometimes where I won't tackle it because it's just not the right time. There's other times where I will dig my heels in and I will make a point of reinforcing something. So there's just choices to make at times.